This evening, we have a couple of items on our agenda as follow-up items that we've asked the staff to look into further. And as is indicated by the copious notes that we have here, they've assembled quite a bit of information. So we'll start off with item A, which is the FY 2025 Street Preservation and Curb Replacement Program. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Salisbury to start the outline on this.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. Stop me anytime you'd like to jump in. But so we bring this to you guys every year. We have the projects ready to go out. We have the streets selected, and I just thought we'd maybe go through how we rate the roads, talk about the numbers associated with the roads we've selected, and then we can kind of go through the map at the end. So it's two projects. It's the curb project and then our street preservation, mill and overlay, and thoroughfare route project that will go out separately. The curb project generally goes out first. The curb project takes a lot longer to complete. We try and get the curb done on a lot of the roads and then do the asphalt afterwards so that the removal process for the curb isn't damaging the new roads. So that's kind of the process. For the ratings, the curb rating numbers are something we kind of developed a few years ago that's really worked out for us. So it's a rating of 1 to 3, 1 being good curbs, 3 being your worst curbs. So every 2 or 3 years we go through, we drive all of the roads, we look at them and assess a value to those roads, and then we try and focus our project on roads rated 2.5 to 3. That's generally where all of our roads that we're replacing curb are going to be. That curb rating process is definitely a long one. It takes about 80 hours of driving around, looking at roads. So we break it up over about a month, though, so that you're not staring at roads for 8 hours a day. And then for the street preservation number, we use a pavement condition index, or a PCI, and it's a measurement of the pavement deterioration, dips in the road, cracks, things like that. And there's actually a device that we have mounted in one of our trucks that kind of calculates it all for us. It's a lot more scientific than us driving around and looking at curbs. The goal with that is to keep the roads, the PCI numbers above 55. So if they dip below 55, the road's getting in pretty rough shape, and that's definitely target for replacement. Our scores for this project this year range anywhere from 45 to the high end being 70, but the 70 is in morning view, and because of the sidewalks and stuff, we kind of try and keep those roads in a little better condition than maybe your average road. So that kind of wraps up the rating system. Moving on to the next stapled set of pages.
Before we move on, Trent, can I ask the team up here if they have any questions about the rating system? Anyone? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Not a problem. So moving on to the next set of sheets, it's the street breakdown, and it lines up with the map, but it kind of says street name, start, stop point, how much we're doing, and the estimated cost for each of those segments. And then on the right side there is the funding source and the budget from each of those funding sources. So the street budget is a combination of 3 funding sources totaling just under $2 million. And then on the second sheet, it details the curb budget being a combination of 4 different sources totaling just under $1.5 million. So we have a significant amount of money invested in this project. We've tried to pool together as many projects as possible so that when they're on a road, they're replacing not just the curb, but the curb, the ADA ramps, and doing the street when it makes sense. So that is the highlight on the budget information. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, that's a lot of information to absorb. I didn't know if anybody had an opportunity to study this. Probably not. I think we just got it this evening, so there's a lot of information on there, and can be brought up at a subsequent work session if necessary. Mr. Fearborn?
If I could give a couple of closure items. The council will notice, compared to previous years, there's a lot more color on this map. And the reason there's a lot more color on this map is because our funding source is up considerably, because the council has dedicated a significant amount of projected available fund balance to be used solely for this source, which is why we're able to do considerably more in this year's program than previous programs. We have also, you'll notice on the bottom of the street preservation sheet that I had informed the council that because we have put off sales tax for 58 Highway, we are actually dedicating a full $350,000 just to the repairs that we think will need to go on there, because it'll be more than filling potholes. There's going to be some spots where we're going to have to go in and do a little bit more work than just filling a pothole as we wait. Hopefully, if we get this same type of funding source and the council dedicates the same type of funding source, we'll be able to keep this type of a program up and keep up with 58 Highway till we can find a more permanent program and solution for that. But at least I felt we needed to recommend to you all that a significant amount of this money be dedicated just to 58 Highway. The other thing that we just, in conversations today, as we come out of, as we see 60 degrees tomorrow, and we start to get some heavier rains, and the roads lose the white paint that's on them that is now salt and brine, we are going to see probably a historic year of pothole patching needing to be done. We had 2 historic storms followed by historic cold, and then this brutal upturn both times to warm weather. You're going to see the expansion just killing us in the near term as far as potholes. So we know that when we're seeing more potholes, you all are going to be getting more calls on potholes. Just get them over to Public Works and we'll get on them as quickly as we possibly can. That concludes the staff report on this item, sir.
So I had a question, Trent. So and it may be a single project in and of itself, not on this particular plan of action, but the Lake Crest issue with the road fallaway, is that a separate project?
It is a separate project, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, it's its own CIP project.
That's what I thought. Okay. And we're getting to that, what, this spring or summer?
Yeah, I'm gonna wait until to actually do the project in the summer when it's a little bit drier, so that they aren't battling the water issue out there. But yes,
Absolutely.
we're shooting to work on it in the next few weeks and then start to get it out and get it ready for summer.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Mr. Baker?
A couple. First, like the section on the map where it says like 9 through 14, curb if budget allows with mill and overlay. Is that curbing and mill and overlay if budget allows, or is it one or the other? Or
So the mill and overlay will be conducted no matter what. Those roads, the curb was in a little bit better shape. So we will do the curb if our budget allows. It's how it's written. A lot of times we get 1 or 2 bids that are way lower than the others. So we always operate off the average. So the average, I believe, was $46 a linear foot. I believe last year we paid $35 a linear foot. That's why we build in these extra roads, so that if one of the contractors does come in way lower, we're prepared for the next, to add the roads to fill out the project. We just don't want to be presumptive that one of them are going to get it and overdo the project. That's why we do that.
and also the material. I talked to Mr. Fearborn about it, but the material we use in whitetail for the seams. I've talked to a few people out there in the last week or so, and it seems to be holding up. But do we have a progress report on the durability of that, especially like going into the summertime? And so far it's withstand, but we don't have like snow plows. Is it withstanding that?
I actually drove through there, I believe it was last Tuesday during the snowstorm, and I was impressed with how well it was holding up. No one that drives a plow truck has complained about it tearing up plows or anything like that. So that will definitely be something we look to do more of as summer goes along.
And is that cheaper than, or more durable than asphalt? I mean,
It is significantly cheaper than, and it's something that our crews can do as opposed to having to hire it out. So I'm a big fan of that product.
It was actually a Dodge City product.
Yeah, that's correct. When I worked for the city,
For those of you who don't know, Mr. Salisbury's from Dodge City, so.
when I worked for the city of Dodge City, they did it out there, and it was a way they had a very limited budget, and it was a way they could really stretch their budget and do a lot more. So when we started talking about that kind of situation, I brought that up and we tried it out, and we were really happy with it. So.
It was put down in 3 different test areas in the city. They all seem to be holding up, as Mr. Salisbury indicated, very well. And it was actually put down under less than ideal conditions. It was very, very warm when we put it down, and it was our first time trying it. So we've been pretty impressed so far. I would also point out to the council, most of you know this, when we do this bid, we do it by quantities associated with what you see on this map. So if we get the heavy rains and all of a sudden we can see the streets again, and there's a street that, and we've all seen it, just deteriorates completely overnight, we can always either change, or this way, if this year we were overbid, it'd be the first time in years and years and years that we had to cut streets because the bids were too high. So we would hope we're gonna have some flexibility in what's in front of you here.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor,
Mills? Yeah, Mr. Mills.
just a quick question or comment. I know some of other cities have a website or something where people can report potholes, and to where if I went to it, I saw that somebody already reported the pothole, and so it might minimize the number of calls on the same pothole. Have we looked into doing anything like that, and where we could communicate that out to the public to go to this site to report a pothole, and we have a list of them so we don't have 20 people calling on the same pothole?
We can certainly look into a streamlined process. We do have the report, what do we call it? Oh, Ms. Harmer's not in here anymore. The text message that you all have has actually a spot on there where you can go straight for potholes. But we can also look at getting something streamlined on the website too.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else? Yes, Mr. Circo.
Just real quick, speaking of potholes, a nice one just accumulated right there on Lucy Webb and South Sunset, where I run and hit it every time because I forget it's there and I run into it. Just food for thought. If we can get that patched, I appreciate it.
Our guys will be out this week doing pothole patching, so we'll get it.
I don't like using time to make your own complaint there, that's all right. Yeah, well, what? Okay. All right, moving right along here then. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to item B? Seeing none, we'll move on to item B, residential housing standards and the initial checklist review. Mr. Fearborn.
Thanks, sir. I would ask Mr. Gress to make the report on this item.
Thank you, sir. The Mayor and Council, at our last work session, together we had an opportunity to talk about some items that staff was considering relative to adopting some minimum design standards for detached single-family housing. As we kind of gave in some of that presentation, we do have in our code adopted standards for housing in some of our other categories, meaning attached single-family, our fourplexes. We have some adopted design standards within those. And then in other sections of our zoning code relative to some of our overlay zoning districts, we also have some enhanced standards that are required to be met when developers ask to use those zoning tools as opposed to our traditional, more conventional zoning districts. And so use that opportunity to get some preliminary feedback and kind of some direction from the council on what things that you all might like to see. Mr. McCumber kind of walked through some other neighborhoods that we have that have used some of those zoning tools and have incorporated some design standards into their homes and into those developments. And so some of the work that we have done is kind of doing some research on what other cities currently have in terms of minimum standards from things like simple as landscaping all the way up to actual changes in the homes that we might see moving forward. And the feedback and what we're here to present tonight is what we're kind of calling the baseline standard for our traditional zoning district. So you'll see in our intent there, we're looking to move forward in how we would look to codify some of these things, both in kind of an easy-to-read checklist format, but also in our Unified Development Code, so it becomes the policy as we're looking at building out and seeing more housing construction in the city into the future. So within this checklist, you'll kind of see it broken up into two different items. The first really being focused on the building itself, the home, how it's constructed, what you see as you're driving down the street, what it looks like from the right-of-way as you're driving through neighborhoods. And then as you look at what those design standards might be, the second half of this checklist really deals with how do those homes now start to get spread around in a subdivision so you lose some of the monotony that we have seen in some of our recent proposals and subdivisions where you have kind of the same pattern repeated over and over again. And so we'll kind of walk through the checklist and really open to any feedback that the council might have as we look to, again, move towards codifying some of these items. The first item really deals with the design and the material aspect of the home. So what materials are they using to actually construct the home? As Mr. Fearborn mentioned in the last work session, we're seeing a change in the models in which subdivisions are being built, where you would traditionally have one developer selling homes to multiple builders. You're seeing a lot more interest in one developer coming in and also being the builder in those subdivisions where they have very similar or simplistic, repetitive housing floor plans, housing types, and so forth. So within that, there's kind of three different elements that we have looked at for how we would look to break up some of that material. First one just being requiring some sort of very varied use in complementary materials, whether that's brick, stone, cement board, something that's more hardy than what you might typically find in standalone vinyl siding or seamed vinyl siding, et cetera. Kind of the add-on to that would be maybe vinyl siding isn't totally prohibited, but you have to pay more attention to what you can actually see on the street side of the home as you're driving down the street. So maybe we're looking at more of a combination of those durable materials on the front facade of the home or the street-facing sides, and giving a little more flexibility to some of those other materials on the side and the rears of the homes. And then the third point would be, once we kind of decide what that appropriate mix is, requiring a variety in the color palettes that you're seeing. So again, you're not seeing every home now has brick and stone and vinyl. You still want to be able to break that up into those different material variations in terms of the color and finish. The second element of that we kind of realized as we were driving around deals a little bit less with the home and more with the driveway. As you're driving down the streetscapes in some of our neighborhoods, and we put into your packet kind of an aerial view that shows really 4 or 5 different types of driveways that we have in the city. Right now, one of the things that you'll see that obviously a garage-heavy subdivision will do is it really places a dominance on the driveway and the garage and not so much the front door, the porch, and more of the people-oriented elements of the subdivision. And so we tried to look at some elements in our code that we could maybe detract from the garage and the driveway being the most prominent feature. And if it's going to be the most prominent feature, maybe dressing it up a little bit so it has a little more visual interest. And so a couple things you'll see in there would be really regulating that street-facing garage door to include maybe some ornamental hardware, some decorative windows, different finishes on the garage door. So again, you're not driving down one of our streets and seeing blank garage door after blank garage door after blank garage door. The other thing that we looked at is you see those garage-dominated oriented streets. There's really not ever a good opportunity to break up that variation in subdivision until you get to an intersection where you've got 4 corner lots. All of our corner lots have 2 front yards, meaning that they do have the flexibility in every case to have a side entry garage where interior lots do not. And so we were kind of tossing around the idea, since that opportunity is there, do we start using that as an opportunity to break up the design a little bit and require that when you have a corner lot, your garage door cannot be on the same facade as your main entrance or your porch or your patio. There would be some caveats to that if the road is designated as a collector roadway where you would not want driveways interfering with the traffic. But as you drive through some of our older neighborhoods in the city, even older, more traditional split-level type homes, you'll see that even breaking up the garage face and placing it on the side makes those homes look a lot different than just having the same pattern over and over again. The other option would be encouraging some way to get a setback in the garage face from the main facade of the home to really bring out that front porch a little bit more. Maybe the garage is sunken back. That's a requirement right now in our original town neighborhood. You can have front-loaded garages, but it cannot be the primary feature of the home. It's got to be side-loaded or set back at least 8 feet from the main entrance. So that's why you see some of those homes over there. They're older in nature, but the garage isn't always the dominant feature in some of those older type of homes. And then the last item would be at the right-of-way line, as you look at, especially on that aerial photo, maybe placing some restrictions on how wide you can have your driveway curb cut at the right-of-way line. We have a lot of homes that have 2-car garages, a lot of homes that have 3. When you look at what that 3-car wide curb cut really does for the sidewalk and where folks are actually trying to walk around a neighborhood, that additional 8 to 10 feet really can make a lot of difference with cars parked there, with other things that might be obstructing the sidewalk, but it's also just a larger piece of pavement to try and traverse as people are also doing things in their driveway. So right now, we do have a minimum width for what a driveway can be built at. We do not have a maximum width, and I think the direction we would be maybe seeking with that would be, we're not trying to limit the fact that you can have a 3-car garage or a 3-car driveway, but really trying to limit how much pavement is at that right-of-way line where pedestrians are trying to walk. And so you can see in that photograph the different ways that folks have had 2, 3-car driveways, but each of those instances are a little bit different as you look at where that curb cut is. Again, this, from staff's intent, would be the minimum standard for all homes moving forward if we were to decide to move forward with it. If we move forward with this type of plan, we would look at other standards for some of our other overlay districts where you have some more flexibility possibly to do things in a subdivision. Our intent here was to kind of take what we've already adopted in some of our overlay districts, pull some of those out and make them the new minimum standard, and then raise the standard with some of those other tools that we've used in the past, like the P overlay district or the PUD, some of those other zoning tools that we have in the code. I'll pause there in the middle before I get into the second half, but if there's any questions or feedback or direction on the design standards themselves, we'd be really interested in hearing those.
I actually like the direction you're going with many of the items that you've mentioned here tonight. So I was curious, what is the opinion of staff with regard to that curb cut issue? You talked about the driveway. There's a lot of 3-car driveways that narrow to the 2-car driveway width. Is the city recommending that it stay that way, or are you recommending that there actually be a 3-car driveway to the curb cut?
I think the direction staff would be going, we talked a little bit about this from Public Works, because really they're the ones that are in charge of that right-of-way line, but from an aesthetic standpoint, I think we would be looking at setting a maximum width for what you could have at the curb cut, still allowing the 3-car driveway where you would taper out into your 3rd-car garage. When you look at just the continuity and a very, not seamless, but standard of what the driveway width is, kind of talking with Mr. Salisbury, that allows them to plan a little bit more for how much concrete might it take to fix an issue if one of our manholes damages a driveway approach. We do have standards for driveway approaches in general, in terms of the material that has to be used, and those are the things that Mr. Salisbury and his team inspect as part of home construction. So the concept of standards for that wouldn't be really new for builders. Where we might see a little bit of pushback would be from folks who just want to pull out of that 3rd-car garage and just be in the street and ready to go. Right. We have in our code other things like lot coverage for how much impervious surface you can have on a lot. So even taking that chunk of that 3rd-car driveway would reduce the amount of pervious pavement that somebody would have on their lot. But I think if you're asking for what staff's opinion would be, it would be the narrower you can make that while still allowing a 2 to 3-car garage to be built might be the direction that we would head.
Yeah, I know, and I hate when members of this board or the planning and zoning relate to what I would want, but I'm going to say what I would want. I would want the 3-car wide driveway. Aesthetically speaking, it makes better sense, and safety-wise, it makes better sense than trying to maneuver if you have other cars parked in the driveway and you have to get something out of that third garage. I know I have an elderly neighbor, and he parks his truck in the third garage, and he has that cut and is constantly running over rocks and things in his driveway to get out because he can't back straight out. And I was wondering, from a city perspective, is there truly an advantage for us to minimize that? You're talking about curb replacement, so to speak, and what that means in the future. Is it really, I mean, has staff looked at that enough to say that that's an issue?
It's not the conversation tonight isn't about funding. The conversation tonight is, what does the council want to see when you drive in a neighborhood?
Okay.
As far as monotony is concerned, as far as the looks of the houses is concerned, and I can bring this up. I'm sure someone is listening. But while we were having this conversation, sir, you know where I live. You've dropped me off there a few times. My house could be the poster child for some of the things we're talking about here tonight. As far as huge, I have a 3-car driveway, 3-car garage, plain garage doors on the 3-car garage, no front porch. So as we were having this conversation on things that we were actually using my house as an example of the things that we wanted to talk with you all about. So it really is more of, the council has the chance through this process, which won't end tonight. Certainly, I'm sure there'll be many more conversations, but the council has the opportunity to kind of dream about, and charrette style, what you would like to see when you're driving through your neighborhoods and what you would not like to see driving through your neighborhoods. And there's pros and cons to everything. Like you just brought up, perfect example, sir.
Sure.
You know, it is a wide driveway. It's a visual that you deal with, but it's also a safety concern.
Gotcha. Mr. Holman? Oh, Mr. Burke, go ahead.
Thanks. Looking at the driveway cutouts, in my mind, is when I'm going around my neighborhood, one of the things that's sometimes really irritating is this would maybe have 3 cars that I would need to go around to use the sidewalk, if in this situation, since it's 3 cars wide. That's one of the things that there have been times. One of my friends, he parked his trailer in another part of my neighborhood, and on the sidewalk. So when I walked my dog over his trailer, through the trailer, and down the other side of the trailer, and waved at him, just to make a point. And we spend a lot of money on sidewalks, but how many of them are blocked that you have to go out in the street for? And that's when there's no snow. So that's something I would be interested in.
So are you for or against
I don't
the
want
narrowing?
the narrowing.
I'm not picking up on it
If
here.
you have a 3-car wide driveway, you should be able to park and leave the sidewalk traversable.
Well, there is an ordinance in place that says they should. It's very hard to enforce.
Yes.
But there is an ordinance in place. I would think if you had a little more concrete there with the 3-car driveway, you might have more room to move those vehicles in to not block the sidewalk. I could be wrong, but, I mean, Mr. Holman, what do you got on that?
I have a little different take. I concur with the mayor's statement. I think if you've got a 3-car garage and you want to spend the extra money, most of the time a builder will offer this option. I know they offered it to me, and I opted for all 3. But at a bare minimum, I think in rural residential and rural estates, we should not impose this restriction. They're a different style of neighborhood. Rural estate, I believe, is 5 acres or up to 5 acres, and rural residential is like about 1.5 acres, 3.25 and to 1.5 acres is what is in my subdivision. Those, I think, can easily accommodate this. I mean, I agree with your comment in whole, but certainly for those 2 zoning districts, I would not want to make those that a mandatory situation in those 2.
Sure.
And if I could, that's actually a good point, because in some of those zoning classifications, sidewalks aren't even required when you get up to a lot size that large. So what we were trying to conquer there with protecting the sidewalk really wouldn't apply in that same situation.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mills?
One, I agree with the mayor on the driveway situation, and I also with what Mr. Councilmember Burke had mentioned. One of the things I agree, I know it's tough to enforce, and we may have to just do it as a community thing where we're putting out a bunch of stuff on Facebook and letters and doing stuff, but we do need to do a better job as a community, not blocking the sidewalks, letting their cars in the driveway and things like that. I do notice that a lot. And it might just be a matter of making people aware of that and about being a good neighbor. It might be something that we can do that way. The other thing I want to mention is on the design materials, it talks about, if you use vinyl siding, must use some other complementary materials. I would just like to include in that, there's a lot of improvement into vinyl. And they actually have vinyl that looks like shake shingles, that looks like brick, looks like things like that. And I do think on the front of the house, if they go with vinyl, they could still use vinyl, but they would need to use some of those other vinyl materials that don't look just like flat siding. I don't know that we would have to mandate that it has to be actual brick or stone or veneer or something like that. But I think there's vinyl out there that doesn't even look like vinyl anymore, if you use the right type of materials.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, Ms. Abdelwood.
Thank you, sir. I kind of piggybacking on what Councilmember Mills said. My question in reading through the list was, this isn't my field, obviously, but is lower quality materials defined? Like, would what I consider lower quality materials align with what someone else considers lower quality materials? Does that phrase need to be better defined if we're going to have it on paper as a guideline for people?
I think what we would end up adopting as part of this would be some more research from the builders industry side of things to get more definitions behind some of these materials. And it sounds like, based on your comment and Councilmember Mills, because I would agree, the thing that came to my mind would be like the classic 3-tab shingles that really, people don't use those anymore. They use more of the architectural shingles that look like wood shake, but they're not. So maybe what we were trying to get in that design elements is just more visually interesting materials, because there have been a lot of new technologies in vinyl to where you could have a nice textured, visually interesting, and not just a blank wall of what typically used to be vinyl siding. So there probably is some more research to do with the industry experts. Mr. McCumber has scheduled a couple meetings with the HBA to even talk with them about some of this stuff as well. So I'm sure there are some standards out there that we could bring back as a definition or a guidebook that would go with this. But I definitely agree with your statement.
The vinyl is interesting because, as we had indicated in the first work session, Mr. Gress and I actually went up and looked at one of the Horton subdivisions up north in Platte City. And at one point, we were both trying to figure out if the siding on the house was actually vinyl. And so you have two gentlemen in suits with their noses like this close to it, and we're tapping it. I still don't know if it was vinyl or not. If it was vinyl, it was awful good material.
Mr. Baker, did you have something?
Yes. So I guess the point, you used the word encourage a couple times. If we adopt this, does that mean, like, with encouragement, as a developer brings you a plan and says, I would like to do this, and we have this checklist that we're going to use to, I know we always hear 9 out of 10 plans on things we never see, but is that something that we could hold to? And then the term variety, to me, and maybe Mr. Zer might be able to answer it, but if someone told me you have to have a variety of colors in your homes, I could have 99 homes that are white, and I could have one home that's red, and that would suffice to be, I have a variety of colors in my homes. I think some of that might be vague. I know that if I was a developer, I would probably want a little clearer. It may corner us a little bit to say that, but if there's an ounce of being able to take advantage of what's written, that would be something that I would be concerned about.
That would actually come into play in the next section we're going to talk to you about as far as anti-monotony. You could not have 99 homes in a row be white and then one be blue. If it
Yeah, and that's, I have a question on
that's
the
where we're
ratio
going to
there
be
when we get
seeking
down
that
there,
kind
so
of
yeah.
direction as well.
To your first question, which was the variety, or no, it was on the encouragement versus requirement. The intent of this would be requiring these things no matter what. Some of these at this point, because we're talking a little more high level, was just here's what we're trying to do with this requirement. But at the end of the day, whatever this final form looks like, the intent would be it's a requirement for you to do this after that would be adopted.
Mr. Barber, did you have something, sir?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on what a couple people had talked about on the materials. I think it needs to be written where there's some flexibility as technology changes. You know, what we have today may be something different 5, 6, 7 years, again, like the faux vinyl siding or whatever. So, you know, have the flexibility in there that can make some changes, like as technology changes and patterns change.
Anyone else before we move on?
Mr. Mayor, if I could have just a moment, I wanted
Cumber,
to
go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to some of the conversation earlier about some of the curb cut discussion, and Mr. Burke kind of touched on it a little bit, kind of that experience from walking the sidewalks, and that's kind of the larger half of the topic of controlling curb cut widths in a residential area. As everyone here lives in a residential area, that's the place where people reside, and that's where you spend a lot of your time going for walks throughout your neighborhood. Depending on what neighborhood you're in, you may experience a little bit different type of walk. Some of our newer subdivisions where we have, the norm started to become some of the smaller lot subdivisions, and those fronts of homes and the fronts of those lots are more dominated by garages today than they have been in the past, and those lot widths being smaller, suddenly that driveway becomes nearly half of that frontage. And the amount of time you spend walking the length of a block in those subdivisions, half of that time or more, you're crossing a driveway. And every time you cross let's say a lane in a driveway, that's a potential conflict zone for a pedestrian, for an accident to occur. As vehicles are parked out in the driveways, it becomes blind spots, things of that nature. So when thinking about trying to control curb cuts in a subdivision, that is a big part of it, the pedestrian experience while walking the sidewalks in a neighborhood, and as well as the safety concerns too. So that is a big kind of driver in kind of bringing it up. And I think there was a good point made about maybe some of these other zones that have larger lots and the nature of those. You know, maybe those are handled a little bit differently, but in some of our standard residential zones where we're starting to see kind of that smaller lot development, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, it's just how do we then handle the design specific to those smaller lots, and maybe that needs a little bit more thought, so that way they are laid out a little bit better and more friendly to the folks that are walking throughout the neighborhood and, you know, enjoying their time that way. So I just wanted to circle back to that before we moved on to the next section. So.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Bellwood?
So with that, would it make sense to say your driveway can only be a certain percentage of your frontage property? I mean, something like that, rather than restricting, you know, the 3 driveways. If you have a smaller lot, you have a smaller driveway. If you have a wider lot, you can have a wider driveway.
It seems like as we've talked through that, you're looking at the spectrum of lot sizes, and so the percentage calculation might be worth looking into. The other thing would be on more of these traditional zoning standards where the lots are pretty typical, this might be something that we maybe pull from the baseline standard or maybe tweak that requirement a little bit and place that into more of the P district. When you're looking at maybe adjusting some of those development standards, you don't want 2 homes right together. Now you have, 40 feet of a driveway you've got to walk across by the time you have 2 or 3 homes together. So I think we can look at that a little bit differently and a little better, maybe on a different calculation for these R districts, maybe a different application of it to the other standards. Because your point of the kind of unintended consequence, you have a 2-car driveway, but your neighbor's still driving through their grass as they're backing out, like that doesn't really enhance the streetscape. So we want to avoid those unintended things by trying to regulate and make the street look a little bit nicer. So that point was well taken.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Is the council good with us considering bringing to you all more decorative garage doors though. And especially if we've got the 3-car garages where it's just not one blank garage door, even to the point of handles and windows, and you see some pictures there.
One of the things that I had shared with Mr. Fearborn as we were drafting this is trying to think really hard about things that builders are already purchasing for the home. Every home has to have a garage door if you're putting a garage on the home. And so if you think about just make that garage door look a little bit nicer, it's not like we're now requiring a new garage door where there wasn't one before. So as we look at what, as we move into the conversations with the builders at some point as this exercise goes forward, we want to be able to kind of point to, we're not really asking you that much comparatively to what's already going into this home. We kind of feel that will go a little bit further than as a baseline standard, putting in all these new requirements that they're not used to right now. So I think from Mr. Fearborn's point, we would really like a thumbs up or thumbs down if that's something that would make a difference in the council's mind as you drive through these subdivisions.
Any opposition? Mr. Holman, did you have something?
I agree with the concept, but I think it would be best worded if it were you have options. In other words, I want a garage door with no windows simply because I want the extra insulation, but I'll go with lights on the side. For example, you have an either or, it's going to give you your architectural breakup, but you're not forced into that particular garage door with windows in it. Or you can, what was the other options? Ornamental hardware, right? There's one. As opposed to having, you're forced into this, you've got some options to do what we want to accomplish without being forced into one particular style.
Mr. Mills?
I would mention, I kind of agree with Councilmember Holman. I know just from experience, you work on a budget to build a home and you have this concept of these great garage doors and then you start running over budget. And a lot of times the first thing to cut is, okay, I'm not going to get the fancy, stable looking garage doors. I think we should be able to have a variety. I think if we've got this monotony thing, we're talking about anti-monotony. I think, if there's a house or two that maybe has a more simple garage door, but there's a lot of houses that have the more decorative garage doors. I think, just like Councilmember Holman said, maybe, you put some sconces or lights or you do something different, but I think we've got to have, it gets back to where you don't want every garage door in the subdivision looking the same. Is my biggest issue is that you just don't have this, everybody's garage doors exactly the same.
Okay, thank you. Everybody good with going in the direction there? Okay. I think we're getting a nod from
Proceed, sir.
majority.
Thank you.
Go ahead to the next part.
So the next half of this would be, even if you picture what your ideal home looks like, if you had 100 of those right next to each other in a subdivision, we still didn't accomplish what we set out to accomplish of the variety in homes. And so there's two aspects of that we kind of think would help break that up a little bit more. I had a good opportunity to review some landscaping standards and learn from Mr. McCumber's experience in some other cities that he's worked in, and realize that our landscaping requirements, I think I mentioned this at the work session, are pretty minimal right now compared to where some of these other builders are building. In Raymore, you only have to have 1 tree per street frontage, so at most we're getting 2 trees planted with every home, usually just 1. What you find in other communities is a requirement for maybe not more trees, but a more variety in trees. So you might have 1 principal tree and then 2 decorative trees, or maybe a tree in the backyard. What you'll also find is a requirement for more shrubs or more ground cover, if you will, as opposed to just the 1 tree. And there's a couple different ways that we've seen this done in our research so far. Either the city has a list of what you can choose from. You have to choose one or the other. 1 tree plus 3 shrubs. And that's what you have to plant. Or we've seen it to where the city develops kind of a menu of what you can plant and assigns a value to those. And so we tell the builder you have to get 50 points in landscaping items or elements. And each of those different, a large shade tree might have 20 points. Individual shrubs or different gallon sizes of landscaping will have a different point value to that. So maybe related to what we just talked about with, we're not telling you what you have to do, but we're telling you what requirement you have to meet. that gives the builder and the homeowner some flexibility to choose what they might find interesting versus what we are saying might be interesting. But the intent being, we've realized that our landscaping requirements for new homes is pretty minimal. Knowing that a lot of the builders that we work with work in other cities, we think there's a lot of room for improvement to just make the property look a little bit nicer from a landscape perspective.
Yep, I like that.
And then last would be, again, all these elements considered, you don't want the same looking house with the same landscaping right next to each other. And so what we've been researching here is part of our subdivision review, trying to come up with a table or some sort of matrix for how many home types might be required in a subdivision. And what I mean by that would be variety in maybe it's ranch homes, maybe it's 1.5 story, 3-story, 2-story homes, split level. There's a lot of different variety in each of those different home types. And then so the next piece of that would be how many variations of that home type do we want to see? If you're only offering all ranch homes in a subdivision, we might want to see 8 different variations of that ranch home with different materials, different colors, et cetera. If you're planning on offering 4 different home types, 2-story, 3-story, 1.5 story, you might be able to get away with less variation because you're going to have distinct home types in that subdivision, not all being the same. And so as we kind of walk through how we look at implementing that, would be a requirement for, as I mentioned, most of our, or a lot more of our interest right now is on the builder side of developing subdivisions. And so most developers at this point know the types of homes that they're going to build, so they can get that information to us as part of their preliminary plat or final plat application. Some cities around us have some level of anti-monotony in what they require to be submitted with an application in the form of what some cities call a lot placement plan. So they're going to tell us in this phase of 20 homes in the first plat, here's how many of this home are going to be placed, and here's how many of that style are going to be placed. What we're trying to find a way to look at is how do you make sure you don't have 5 of the same home right next to each other, and if you do, what types of things have to be done to still make those homes appear a little bit different. You look in some of our older subdivisions, as I mentioned earlier, split-level homes have been a pretty common home type for a long time now, and so you have an atrium split, you have a California split, you have a traditional split level. So how do you look at, we still want to allow those types of homes that are pretty common, but what we don't want is for that same home to be cut and pasted right next to each other,
Right.
block for block. So I think relative to that implementation, there's still a lot of work on our end of what we're going to require to be submitted with that, but I think the intent is that we don't want these cookie cutter neighborhoods where it's just the same thing. Even if it's a beautiful looking home, you don't want that same pattern repeated over and over again.
And there is a vehicle by which we can codify that through zoning measures, correct?
Yes.
And have you, in your research, have you found any other communities that have adopted those types of anti-monotony?
We've done a little bit. I know peculiar to the south of us here, they do have an ordinance. We looked at a lot of theirs and kind of heard from some of their staff on how receptive builders are to it. What we kind of found out is that similar to their garage door discussion, you're not really asking for anything new. You're just asking the developer to really think about it a little bit more on the front end of things for where they're going to be putting things. So in most cases, I think there's always going to be pushback to some level of change, but like I said, from our perspective, we're trying to figure out what's already happening out there and what can we just make them think about a little bit differently. So I know around Raymore, Peculiar is the only local community that we found that has an adopted ordinance. In terms of subdivision regulations, there are more cities that have those, but not necessarily with the anti-monotony piece associated with it.
Okay.
A lot of the builders in a lot of metropolitan area cities are operating under some degree of this or another. Lee Summit's an example. So if Summit's going into Lee Summit, they're having to deal with anti-monotony and design standards. They know them already. They're in place. So this isn't going to be a surprise to them when the council adopts some form of it for the city of Raymore.
Okay.
They're already doing it in other locations. The anti-monotony is interesting because staff is still, as Mr. Gress said, we've got a little bit of work to do on what does that look like in black and white? Are we talking about per block? Are we talking about per 6 homes? And it's kind of all over the board for that. so council needs to be kind of thinking about that as well. We'd ask you to, as you're out doing your walks or driving through neighborhoods, just kind of think about what would impact you all if you were walking through a neighborhood, as far as thinking, that's too much of that. How many is that? Is it per block?
I wanted to share maybe an anecdotal example that recently came up for staff here. As I mentioned a couple times, Original Town is one of the only neighborhoods that has adopted design standards from the neighborhood plan that we did many years ago. So the garage requirement is a big piece of that in that neighborhood, since it's the most historic neighborhood. The garage element cannot be the focal point of your home. So recently we had a builder that purchased a couple lots for an infill house there in Original Town, and approached staff with the type of home you would see in most of our traditional neighborhoods. So they were a little shocked when we kind of went back to them and said, you can't build that. You've got to tweak that a little bit and make it match these design standards. And I would say at first they were a little apprehensive, because staff just kind of shocked them with them ready to pull the permit and get to work. But again, with the garage door, since those are things that you're already building, after we talked through with that builder who has built in all of our other subdivisions around town, or a lot of them, after talking through them with what the intent is, and here's how we think you could meet that in terms of what percentage the garage is taking up on the home, it wasn't but 4 days that they had to go back and redraw the home and give it back to staff, and they were very receptive to it. So I think a lot of it is going to come down to just the education and talking to the builders about what it is that we've just adopted. They're not used to it in Raymore specifically, but as Mr. Fearborn said, they're used to it in some aspect in a lot of other cities that they're probably working in. But it was odd as we're going through this, having that example pop up and having it solved relatively effortlessly on staff and the builder's part was actually pretty enlightening to see.
Oh, good. All right. Anybody have any questions? Mr. Baker?
I guess just a comment on this bottom section. I guess my thing, I'll just say it, 5-foot offset drives monotony in a housing subdivision. We've seen it south side where I live at, we've seen it in Creekmore, that I think the closer you get homes, the process of monotony is starting with that. So I would kind of like to see maybe that be considered something that for future developments. I think, when you talk about a width of a lot and you're talking about 5.5 or 5 foot to 7.5, it's a very small part on the side of the yard that we may, limit a developer to be able to use. But I think the end result is a neighborhood that looks a lot more, I guess, clean and organized with at least a 7.5 foot offset on the side yard. A lot of these elements I really do support, like the garage my garage is up front, and I didn't build my house, but I bought the house, but, I liked where they have to be back. But I do think that when you start looking at smaller offsets and more fronts of the house, it does get close. Maybe that might help the driveway situation because you got more grass if you have a house there or not. But I would like to see the offset maybe be considered in this. And maybe there is a place in a development, but I think when you're developing homes around existing homes that don't meet that, what might be the buffer, or is it an area, part of town we haven't developed yet, and maybe that's the right time for a 5-foot offset. So
Mr. Burke?
I just wanted to say, as far as earlier when we were talking about ways that we could persuade builders, well, the whole idea here is we want to make sure we persuade them before they ever get to this level, because we don't want to be the ones that persuade them by saying no, and they've just spent all this time and money to get to this level to see us. So we want to make it as predictable as possible for them, so they can feel like that we can have a win-win every time here in Raymore.
That's a good point. Mr. Mills?
Yeah, one's a question and the other comment. I'll say the comment first and the question. I think when we talk about the multiple home types and we go to drill down on this, I think we have to also look at the intent of the neighborhood or community. So if that neighborhood or community is for, people over 55 or 60, and they're looking for ranch homes, I think the idea maybe you have multiple ranch designs, but not say, okay, you have to have some 1.5 stories or some 2 stories in there too. So I think as we drill down on this, we have to look at what the intent of the subdivision is too, and maybe have different design standards for that particular intent. My question is on the shrubbery. If we increase the amount of shrubbery and things like that, will that improve our stormwater runoff problems versus it just being all grass? Would that be a big benefit to the city if we required, more shrubbery, more landscaping, things like that?
I think anything that's not rock or pavement is definitely going to improve our stormwater situation. Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the early conversations I had with Mr. Gress on this is I really like the idea of driveways that has the grass between the two tire tracks that go through the old-fashioned houses. That is truly a pervious surface for a driveway, but I don't think anybody would do that for us. It just looks too odd in this day and age. We'd have three of them, right, going up for a three-car garage. It'd just be weird. But anything that can improve the pervious surface that's going to be out there, like the shrubs and the trees, is really going to help us for sure.
It was interesting as we're going through this list and trying to figure out what does that look like. The first thing we found out is that the city manager's home can't be built anymore because of these standards. But we did, to Councilmember Mills' point, if you look at Morning View being those are all patio homes, there's a little bit of variety in there. But to his point, the intent of that neighborhood is to make it attractive for older adults who don't want multi-story homes. And so, that specific subdivision is a PUD, and so they had the flexibilities because of what they were trying to do. There's the deed restriction, I think, on making those 55 and older. So I think we would build in some flexibilities in there for, if a project were to come forward like that, making the exception for specific cases or waivers around some of these requirements. Because again, I go back to the unintended consequence. We don't want to limit a good project just because it's a good-looking project. Morning View is a good asset for our city, just like all of our other neighborhoods are. So you look at the intent of what we're trying to accomplish, we would find a way to balance that with what these requirements are at the end of the day.
Sure. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree with that. I think they need to be written that we attract quality builders. Because really we know a person that's going to put out a quality product, most of this stuff, they've got to sell these homes. So they're not going to have one home right next to another home, right next to another home. They're going to have variety. They're going to have those type of things. But I like the list. I like the checklist. I like where it's going. But I think we need to really watch what we think, what's attractive and what's not attractive and those type of things. Personally, I think old junky cars out in front of a house makes the house look unattractive. So, do we limit that? So we got to kind of watch when we were talking about, garage doors and those type of things. And there's nothing would keep somebody if you had a garage door and you ran into it to put back whatever you want at your home. So I think if we get a quality builder, a lot of this takes care of itself, but having these in place keeps them honest. Right.
And I would say, just maybe as my last comment on the variety and our setbacks and the separation of homes, the thing I wanted to point out with this is with the zoning districts we've called out, we may take a closer look at the larger lots, the more rural parts of these zoning districts, but the benefit of this is you really can't get to a 5-foot setback in this category of districts that we've pointed out. To get to that level, when you start changing the standards of the development, you have to go the route of a P district or a PUD or some other tool that has to have another approval associated with it. So kind of circling back to our opening statement, this would be the minimum when builders and developers start requesting things for their subdivision that are different than what these base districts have. That would be where we'd start elevating those requirements of, if it's this level of a setback, this will become a requirement. If the home is this close to the street, we'll look at this so we don't block this. Just those are the things that are more, I won't say case by case, but development specific that a builder might be looking to do. This would just be by nature, if you're coming in to build in our established subdivisions, here's what the minimum is. If you're proposing something that needs another approval or another approach to it, that may be a whole totally separate menu of options that we look at for that project.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Did I see a hand? Yeah, Mr. Ingert. Yeah.
Take long, thank you. Has there ever been an occasion where a developer slash builder has said, sorry, you guys have too many restrictions here, and he leaves?
I would say at this point, no, but that's because we have very minimal restrictions on, just by nature of our base zoning districts. Through some of our discussions with PUDs and P districts, as we're negotiating the things that we want to see, some builders do decide, I don't want to mess with that, I don't want to do it, I build what I build, and they have made the decision to go elsewhere. That's not always the reason that they choose to go elsewhere, but as it is right now, since we don't have a very illustrative list of requirements for our homes, it's not often that that's the reason that developers don't move forward.
Yes, Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. So I think this is a decent start. Just to verify, the next phase or the future phase, we intend to include a representative or so from the HBA to give us some input from their side on this. I know that touches on the vein of at least half of what the council has asked tonight was, would this scare builders off? We don't want to do that kind of thing. And I know we'd spoken about that at one time.
Right. We would definitely, we want to put if they are willing, we want to put the HBA in front of the council to make comment on this. That would be a better conversation than having the builders in.
Yeah. Someone from the trade association that can give us information about trends and things like that.
I think it'd be a higher level conversation for the council.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything? Going in the right direction, David. David, thank you. Mr. Fearborn, do you have anything else?
To some of the comments, just a last comment from staff, and Mr. Mills' comment, staff recognizes the supreme importance of diversity in neighborhoods and diversity of neighborhoods, as far as recognizing there is value and greatness in a Morning View and in a Creekmore and in all of our neighborhoods. We have to have that diversity that attracts the ultimate buyers to us. So we have to have that as well. So I appreciate those comments. Staff appreciates those comments, and we'll continue to work on this and get something a little bit more refined back to you for second pass.
Perfect. All right. If there's nothing else, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.